We have this picture in our heads of our ancient ancestors, don't we? They were either these incredibly fit hunter-gatherers, perfectly in tune with nature, or they were constantly getting wiped out by mysterious illnesses. But what's the real story? I mean, how in the world do you figure out what was wrong with a patient who's been dead for thousands of years?
Okay, so let's get right into it. The big question is, what genetic cards were they actually holding? What was their real everyday risk for stuff like cancer, heart disease, or autoimmune disorders? For literally all of history, those answers were just gone. But it turns out they were just locked away inside their DNA. And scientists, well, they finally found the key. You see, for the longest time, paleoanthropologists had to play detective with nothing but skeletons. But bones only tell you so much. Sure, they can show you a nasty break that healed or some serious arthritis. But what about the silent killers? Things like diabetes or high blood pressure don't exactly leave a calling card on a femur. And that's left a massive hole in what we know about health in the past.
But what if we could just skip the bones altogether and go straight to the source, to their genetic playbook? What if we could actually read their DNA and calculate their odds for the exact same complex diseases we worry about today? Well, this isn't science fiction anymore. It's exactly what a groundbreaking new study has just done.
So this brings us to a truly revolutionary tool. Think of it as a new way to perform a medical exam thousands of years after the fact, using nothing more than the faintest traces of ancient DNA.
So how does it work? Well, the engine behind all this is something called a genetic risk score, or GRS. Basically, scientists can now scan a person's entire genome and add up all the little genetic variations that we know are linked to specific diseases. It's like creating a personalized health risk report, written in the language of DNA itself.
All right, I know this looks a little intense, but the idea is actually pretty simple. A raw score by itself doesn't mean much, right? You need context. So to get that context, scientists compare the ancient DNA against a massive database of 100,000 simulated modern genomes. This lets them pinpoint exactly where that ancestor stood. Were they genetically healthier than 90% of people today, or were they in the highest risk group?
Okay, so now that scientists have this amazing tool, they could finally tackle a really big question, one that kind of goes against what a lot of us think about our tough ancestors and our cushy modern lives.
I mean, you've heard this before, right? The idea that we've become genetically soft, coddled by modern medicine and comfort, while our ancestors were these super tough, evolutionarily perfect humans, hardened by a brutal world. Well, this study put that exact idea to the test.
And the answer that came back from the data was a loud, clear nope. Not even close. In fact, the evidence points in the complete opposite direction. So get ready, because this is going to flip what you think you know on its head.
And this chart right here is the proof. Now, don't get lost in all the individual dots. Just look at the big picture. Up at the top, you've got the oldest genomes. Down at the bottom, the more recent ones. See how the whole cluster of dots shifts to the left as you go from top to bottom? A shift to the left means a lower disease risk. It means healthier. It's a crystal clear signal that our collective genetic health has actually been getting better over time.
So what's the bottom line here? The oldest group they looked at, people who lived more than 9,500 years ago, they had significantly worse genomic health on average than the people who came after them. So that whole idea that we're the genetically frail descendants of ironclad ancestors, yeah, it turns out it's a myth.
Okay, so we've established that our genetic health has been on an upward trend. But the story gets even more interesting, because it's not just about when you lived, it's about how you lived. The researchers split the ancient DNA into three big lifestyle groups. You had your nomadic hunter-gatherers, your early agriculturalists who settled down to farm, and your pastoralists, who were all about herding animals. So, place your bets. Who do you think came out on top, genetically speaking?
And wow, you don't even need to be a scientist to see the answer on this risk radar. A smaller shape means lower genetic risk. And just look at that green shape for the pastoralists. It is tiny. It's way, way smaller than the others. For whatever reason, these guys had a massive genetic advantage.
And when you dig into the details, the advantage is just stunning. We're talking a significantly lower genetic risk for cancers, for allergies and autoimmune diseases, and for gut and liver problems. This is the part that has scientists buzzing. Why them? Was it their diet? Was it because living with animals all the time beefed up their immune systems over generations? We have the what, but now the real detective work begins to find the why.
All right, seeing these huge trends is fascinating, but for me, this whole thing gets really cool when we use it to look at just one person. It's like CSI Ancient History. So let's open up a couple of case files.
And who better to start with than the most famous ancient mummy in the world, Ötzi the Iceman. His body, perfectly preserved in a glacier for 5,300 years, already gave us clues. Physical exams showed he had hardened arteries, a classic sign of heart disease.
So they ran his GRS, and yep, his genes basically screamed high risk for heart disease, matching the physical evidence perfectly. But here's where it gets wild. It also showed things you could never tell from a mummy, like a high risk for gut problems. And get this, he was almost definitely lactose intolerant. Just think about that for a second. We now know that a guy who died 5,300 years ago would have had a bad time with a glass of milk. The level of detail is just mind-blowing.
Okay, Ötzi is one thing, but what if we go back even further, like way, way back, to one of our ancient cousins? Let's look at a Neanderthal woman from the Altai Mountains in Siberia. How does her genetic health stack up against ours?
And the result is, honestly, it's staggering. Her genome put her in the 97th percentile for disease risk. Let me say that again. Her genes were riskier than 97% of modern humans. That is just a brutal genetic hand to be dealt.
I mean, her genetic chart was just loaded. High risk for cancers, for immune problems, for metabolic disorders. The list goes on. The one bright spot? Her risk for heart disease was actually pretty low. It just goes to show how specific and personal these ancient genetic portraits can be.
So when you step back and look at all of this, it's clear we're talking about a completely new way of seeing the past. It's like a medical time machine. We can now give a checkup to people who walked the earth tens of thousands of years ago.
So let's just recap the big takeaways. Number 1, forget the myth of the perfectly healthy caveman. Our collective genetic health has actually been getting better over time. Number 2, how you lived mattered a lot. And the ancient pastoralists, for some reason, totally won the genetic lottery. And number 3, we can now create these unbelievably detailed health reports for ancient humans and even our distant Neanderthal relatives.
And all this leaves us with one final, huge question to think about. We've just seen that our genes, our fundamental biological hardware, have been slowly improving for millennia. But our environment, our software, what we eat, how much we move, our stress levels, has changed more in the last 100 years than in the previous 10,000. So looking forward, what's going to have the final say? Our slowly improving genes or our radically changing world?